Hey guys, Stealth here. In this video I'm looking at the NORAD motorized deck that NoMeansYes sent in. It's a deck that's designed for maps on 5v5, 8v8 and 10v10, so it's the larger maps and the larger gameplay. And he says, I use this deck by sending my airborne units along with AA choppers to a secure position until land-based AA tanks and more infantry come to support it. After I establish a foothold, I use mortars to smoke while my air power weakens and stuns enemy positions along my infantry, tanks and mobile AA, but not the Avenger because it's too thinly skinned. After I secure a position, I'll bring up resupplies while receiving mortar and air support present in my deck. Now he wants me to use it, and I definitely will because I really do like motorized decks. He says, I hate the Avenger, it's just too thinly skinned. He loves the Patriot, and he has that on a hotkey so he can turn it on and off quickly as the seed comes in. But he keeps it a few hundred meters behind an ADATS just as a precaution for advances into this group. So let's have a look. NORAD, so that means we got the US and Canada, and they got a very nice combination. Now I don't know if the Ilta CP here would be the best option. I think that with it you're not really that flexible, and normally I have 5 cards here in logistics, but he went with 4, so let's go with that for a change. The thing is that it's very nice and mobile, but it has absolutely no armor. I haven't really gotten many CVs killed due to artillery lately, so in that sense it's not that bad. But if you're going into a more heavily contested area, you might need a teammate to pull that weight, because you don't have the Grizzlies or the LAVs, which have a little bit of armor. Then he has 4 cards of cargoes, sorry, 1 card of 4 cargoes, and 2 cards of Hemmets, which is a very high amount of supplies. At least it's mobile supplies. This is probably a conscious choice. Not that he just went with a couple of supply cards, because with this setup, without a fob, you can just go anywhere. It doesn't really matter where on the map you're operating. If you spot another side of the map where you need to go, you can just go there, and you don't have to worry about where is my fob and can I maintain my supply lines. Especially considering that he doesn't have any very demanding mortars or artillery in here. I think that you can get away with this setup. The only unit I'm slightly worried about is the Patriot, because the Patriot does drain those missiles or the supplies pretty quickly. But for now, let's see if it's going to be enough. We're just going to stick to this setup. Infantry wise, he says I'm going to fly in my Airborne Infantry, which is the Highlanders 90. He has 10 of these veterans here. They got the C7, nice assault rifle. It's not the most accurate, but it does the job. Mini-Me is a pretty decent weapon as well, and unfortunately they are only regular troops, so this is something you will need to keep in mind. I think they are pretty expensive for standard troops, by the way, considering that this shock group of Canadian Airborne 90s is also 25 points. But okay, we're just going to go with this setup. They do have the Erics, which is a nice anti-tank weapon. 25 armor penetration, 60% accuracy in a 1000 meter range means that they can punch through pretty much any armor, but you need an ambush. If these guys get spotted at the maximum range of the tank, they're going to be dead long before they can get a shot off. So that's his Airborne Infantry. Then he has Humvees, so this is his man-pads AA. You got a couple of options here, man-pads wise. You got the Stinger C, and you got the Javelin. Javelin has slightly more range, Stinger has a lot more accuracy. HE power is the same, so that doesn't really matter. It is really up to your preference. If you like to have that additional range at which you can engage helicopters before they are right at the verge of using their rocket pods in your infantry, go with the Javelin. If you don't mind your infantry taking some fire, being slightly more expensive, 5 points, but having a great accuracy, go with the Stinger. I like both, but I like the accuracy on the Stinger a bit more, because it means that I get more damage out of these 6 missiles compared to the Javelin. So the Stinger C is a good unit, and you only have these in the Humvees. Next up, Assault Pioneers, or Pioneers as they're called here. Napalm troops, especially useful if you want to clear out a town. I have not found them that useful in a forest, although they can do the job. But in a forest, the engagement range is usually about 400 to 300 meters, and only at 350 can you start using this napalm launcher. So you have to close in a little bit more before you can start to use this. Keep that in mind as you're using this unit. Light Rifleman, it's been ages since I've used these guys. I'm not saying they're bad units, but the Super Dragon is not stellar. It did get buffed lately, I believe. Probably in DLC 3 or the DLC 3 beta already. Ground range 1925. I think that used to be a little less. They got an accuracy of 15% and an armor penetration of 15. With that armor penetration, you are not going to go through super heavies. You will do some damage because they fire heat projectiles, which always do some damage, but it is not going to cut through the frontal armor. So don't expect these things to take out super heavies. They're just not designed to do that. They also have an M16 and an M240, which are decent weapons, but again, don't expect these guys to win from Spetsnaz based purely on their assault and their LMG. Canadian Airborne, nice units again. He has a good mix in here of high-end anti-tank capability. I suppose you get to call it medium to low-end with 15. And then medium in the form of the Canadian Airborne 90s with their Carl Gustaf M3. Armor penetration of 20, good accuracy. The C7 on these guys is definitely more accurate if you compare it to the Highlanders 90. You can see how the shock troop makes more effective use of the weapon. Interesting thing here is that somehow the Canadian Airborne 90 get a better rate of fire out of this weapon than the Highlanders 90. Not really sure what that's about, but okay, we're just going to go with it. So the Canadian Airborne 90 are coming in the Bison. This is probably going to be his second line or second wave of infantry. And for a motorized deck, I don't think he has a lot of it. I'm not sure I like the Rifleman 90 in this deck. I think that there are better units. Let's see, commando-wise, we only got the Deltas. Not really that interested in Delta at this point. Rifles or lights. We can go with another card of Highlanders 90. Highlanders base are also an interesting option because they got the Carl Gustaf. Canadian Rifles 85. No, these guys are not that good. And then you got the Canadian Airborne again. I think that this Eric squad is definitely redundant because they only have a ground range. Oh, let me select all. They only have a ground range of 1,000, and that means that they are just as effective at range as the Highlanders 90. They just have an HE value here. And that HE value means that they can also engage infantry. Although it's not the best option for these guys. They are really meant to kill tanks. And with it, I'm not going to bring the Erics in this deck, because I feel that we're a little light on infantry here. I'm considering Delta Force, especially if you want to clear out a town. These guys have a pretty good chance of doing that. Of course, they are still going to die, especially if you're coming up against Spetsnaz, Legions, and more of that stuff. Formosas are also a very tough nut to crack for these guys. But I think that we can use a couple of these, either in forest or in town. So I'm going to bring one card of Elite Delta Force in the V150. V150 because I'm using them as specialists. I want these guys to only engage infantry. And if there's a town which is heavily covered by vehicles, I will probably not bring in Delta Force, and I don't need them in more expensive helicopters like the Frog or the Chinook. So sport-wise, you get quite the nice amount of variety in AA using the NORAD deck. Especially the Centurion Marksman fulfills a particularly important role here, since you don't have a SPOG with this range if you're only using the Americans. You get the Pivats, but that's significantly inferior to the Marksman. 6 frontal armor, 3 side armor, 2 back, 2 top, so it's pretty heavily defended. Accuracy is good, stabilizer is pretty good for an anti-air unit. or actually we should be lucky that it has a stabilizer. And anti-helicopter range 2800 meters. The one thing you need to keep an eye on is the ammo supplies, because they will go through their ammunition of 500 rounds pretty damn quickly. He has 8 of these at trained. I think that's a bit of a high amount, so I'm going to go with 6. Then he has Wolverines, which are the fast units with a Javelin LML launcher. I believe they fire these things in salvos of 3, since they have a launcher of 3 on top. I did do a test of this unit, but it's been quite a while. And I haven't exactly used them since. Now these guys are nice for ambushing helicopters or for quickly responding to a flank. They have a very, very high off-road speed of 100. Autonomy is not that good. I was expecting something in the ranges of 600. Because it is a wheeled vehicle, but I suppose that the armor on this thing is weighing it down slightly. Now the accuracy on this thing says 45%, but I've had, maybe I was lucky, but these things have hit pretty much non-stop for me. And because they're so cheap and their accuracy is decent, I'm going to go with 8 at trained. Then he has 1 card of 2 Patriots. These guys have now been made prototypes, or maybe they already were, but you don't get a second card anymore. It's just 1 card of Patriots. They carry 4 of these extremely long-range anti-airplane missiles, 70% accuracy. He has 2 of them at trained. You could go with 1 at veteran, but that would leave at least one side of the battlefield undefended. So going with 2 of them at 70% is good enough, and if these things shoot down 1 or 2 planes, they're going to upfit themselves anyway. Then he has 6 ADATs. ADATs are nice units because they are extremely versatile. They can go for ground targets, helicopters and airplanes, although the airplanes is the worst range of them all. You could say only 2450, but it's not that bad. The accuracy on these things is usually what is limiting their effectiveness, because they're going to go through these 8 missiles pretty quickly, and with an accuracy of 45% they're only going to hit about 4 of them. But whatever they do hit takes a ton of damage. Helicopters, barring the most heavily armed or armored helicopters, will go down, because an HE power of 7 means that they have a pretty good chance of taking down a helicopter in one shot. And tanks will go down pretty quickly as well, but you gotta make sure that these things hit. So possibly team them up in groups of 2 to make sure that you can get at least 1 hit on a tank. Because if that tank manages to get into range, it's going to one-shot these guys. They have 1 frontal armor, and a tank shell is going to have no problem chewing through that layer. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that these are very, very sought after targets by mortars, because they are pretty expensive and so easy to kill. So if you have a couple of ADATs which are firing from a certain position, make sure that as you have them, or as they have fired, relocate them. You don't want them to sit there with a huge sign, okay, shoot me now, because the enemy will do that. Finally, he has Bison 81mm, nice mortars, very, very quick, got a good amount of ammunition supply. High explosive damage is not the most, it's only 3. I don't think you can get many more mortars in here. You can get the LAVM, but that's pretty much a similar unit. This is pretty much the exact same mortar, at least has the same specs, same range, same dispersion, same HE damage, same suppression, same rate of fire. The one thing is that the Bison is slightly more heavily armored at 2. I don't need armor on my mortars, because my mortars are going to be moving all the time, and the only thing that I need is mobility, which they both have, and a decent ammunition supply, which this thing has 10 shells more. So I'm going to throw out the ID ones and get in 6 LAVMs. Moving on to tanks, he only has 2 cards, and I think that that is enough, because you don't really need that many tanks. I use tanks as backup in a deck like this to wipe out some vehicles or some light armor, but otherwise your infantry is going to be pulling most of the punches. He has the Leopard C2, and this Leopard C2, let's compare it to the Super M60, because that's the pretty much the most expensive tanks we can get at only 65 points. Super M60 is slightly more heavily armored. It has 13 versus the 10 on the Leopard. Side armor is significantly more, 8 versus 4. Mobility is slightly better, but the size is big versus medium. This thing is 5 kilometers slower. Autonomy is in the advantage of the C2. And gun-wise, the C2 is better because it has better accuracy, better range, a better stabilizer by far, 25%. And it has 2 more armor penetration. Rate of fire on these things is the same, but I'm going to stick to the Leopard C2 because whether you have 13 armor or 10 armor, if you're up against a tank that's anyway halfway decent, you're going to get 1 or 2 shot anyway. And I want my Leopard to do the most damage in that situation, so I want them to use that 17 armor penetration gun. The other option would be the MBT-70, but that gun's even worse at 13 armor penetration. I know it does fire heat rounds, but I find kinetic to be better. An autocannon would be useful to infantry and forest, so maybe I'm going to switch this around later. And for more anti-vehicle warfare, we got the M8 AGS. It's a very nice cavalry tank. It is very fast. Small size, so it's more difficult to hit with ATGMs and gunfire. Armor-wise, very low. 3 frontal, 2 side, 2 side, 1 back, 1 top. But a great accuracy, especially on the move. A 60% stabilizer is something that you only see in tanks which are usually north of 150 points. And a 17 armor penetration with a 13 rate of fire. Is going to make this thing very, very deadly. Mostly the vehicles and some tanks. Not all tanks will die to that 17 armor penetration. Time to have a look at reconnaissance, and this is where we're also going to use quite a few units. And he has a nice variety here. He has Navy SEALs. I would be inclined to go with a second card of Navy SEALs. Or, actually, thinking about it, I could go with 1 card less over here, so scratch the Delta Force, because Deltas versus SEALs is definitely in the advantage of the SEALs. The problem is I'm also going to lose 4 units, so I'm going to lose 4 units of infantry, because these guys come in at 8 availability and these guys come in at 4. But you do get them at elite. The reason I would prefer Navy SEALs over Deltas is that their weaponry is all around better. They have a much better assault rifle compared to the submachine gun. I know that the submachine gun gets a better rate of fire, but combine that with an MS-72 Law or a Hawk MM1 grenade launcher, and I'll go for the grenade launcher. So I want this deck to be anti-infantry heavy, so no Delta Force, but another card of Navy SEALs. Then he has reconnaissance here, Recce. Nice sniper teams, deployed by helicopter. Not that much to say. They are exceptional stealth sniper teams. Specialty about this unit is that they have 1 armor penetration. So they can and usually will snipe armored vehicles if the armor on those is light, like for example a command vehicle. What I usually try to do is deploy these guys somewhere near or behind enemy lines and start to walk them towards the enemy cap. If you're careful, you can get there, and as you get there you can start to see everything that's going to come in through the enemy spawn. Of course, in a 10v10 this is a bit more difficult to pull off, but in a 2v2 to 4v4 it is possible. Then he has some rangers in here. He went with 6 of these, so these are probably going to be his other passive spotters. I'm not sure rangers here are the best option. Maybe I'm going to throw these guys out because he also has Humvee Mark-19s, which we can use as passive spotters. I know that the Rangers are far more mobile using their Chinook, but we might have a little bit too many infantry units in here. Let's see other units we can use. Yeah, not that many. I'm going to keep them in for now. I might need to reconsider this later. The longbow AH-64D. What's not to like? Exceptional optics, 280 km speed, 16 hellfires, and a great autocannon. Especially on the move, this thing will still hit pretty much half the time. And the stabilizer is also going to help. Now, since you are running a motorized deck, you get a +1 XP to the recon section, and that's why these things come in at hardened, so their accuracy is going to be slightly better. Keep them at range, keep them as spotters, use those Hellfires to pick off high-end tanks. You need to micromanage these guys, otherwise they will get targeted by artillery, such as mortars, or possibly even a Smirch. I think I've had one or two of these things shot down by a Smirch. Or otherwise, someone might send a plane after it because they are that valuable. The Hellfires do double tap. That means that they fire 2 Hellfires at the single target and make sure it's a high value target. Because these Hellfires are expensive to resupply. And considering that he has the longbows in here, I am going to revisit the logistics section, throw out 1 habit and go with a fob anyway. Because not only the longbow takes up a lot of supplies, but so does the ADATs and the Patriot. So I'm going to have to resupply these guys somehow, and getting a fob in here is going to give you far more supplies than any card of logistics can. So that leaves us with the Humvee Mark-19. You can spread these guys all over the map. But since we already have so many of these units, or at least reconnaissance units, I'm going to switch these to veterans so they can give me a little bit more accuracy, or a little bit more chance to see and identify enemy units. So let's go with those. And then finally he has the Bradley M3A2, which is the most expensive Bradley version. It has a decent amount of armor. It has 12 TOW2 missiles, which are guided weapons. Keep an eye on that target until the missile hits. And the Bushmaster is a good gun. Now, these things used to cost you 90 points. They only cost you 75 points now. And I haven't used them since, but I really like these units. Back in the day when they were 90 points, I think they're already worth it at that point, price point. So they're definitely worth it now. Moving on to vehicles, where he has the Humvee TOW2. So we got even more TOW2 armaments. We got some high-end AT weapons on the Highlanders. We got tanks with medium to decent AT values of 17 and 17. We got the ADATs. So maybe the Humvee TOW2 is not that required in this deck, but it's only 1 point since we can use more vehicles and they are cheaper. Also, they get upfitted more, so you can set up nice ambushes with these guys. The one thing I'm going to do is switch them from 6 to 8. Because I want to spread these guys out over the map, and 6 might not be enough. Then 16 Zippos, nice napalm units. You're going to have to rely on these guys if you're facing Spetsnaz or Legions, because you don't really have a lot of other options to go after these guys. You don't get access to the napalm tank in this deck, because it's a motorized deck, you don't get that much armor. So this is the unit that we're going to have to use. And then there's the Combat, which is pretty much a Bradley frame with a better gun. And it's definitely a better gun because it has 70% accuracy, it has armor penetration, which is something that most Bradleys don't have, or at least not that much. Stabilizer 40%, it's a pretty big gap, but you can still fire this gun pretty reliably on the move. And these guys are only 30 points. He has 8 of these in the deck. I'm going to try out the deck and I might need to switch these to 12 depending on how fast I'm going to chew through these combats. Helicopter wise, he has the DAPs and the Apaches, so he has the AA capability and the AT. This deck, I gotta say, is very heavy on AT, maybe even too much, but I'm not really sure what other unit would be useful here. Because we got a ton of anti-infantry capability in the form of the SEALs, the Zippos, and some of the infantry in the infantry tab. We got AT vehicles. We got AT vehicles. We got AT ADATs, AT tanks, AT infantry. Do we really need an AT chopper? I'm going to say yes, because armor is usually still a pretty significant threat to motorized decks. So in this case, it's nice to be able to have the Apache, so I'm going to keep it in. And then there's the DAP, which got, well, it's got its armament changed. I was going to say it's got its teeth pulled out because it doesn't carry those Hellfires anymore. But with the Stingers, you can be quite the nuisance to enemy air units. Especially in the beginning, these guys will be important. If you have, say, 2 DAPs and a couple of these Highlanders, you're going to have a decent setup, and your Highlanders have a good chance of arriving at their destination. Air-wise, he has 5 cards in here. Thunderbolts for anti-tank capability. Hornets for more anti-vehicle capability. I'm going to say anti-vehicle because their armor penetration is 6, and while these things still do attack from the top of the unit, they might not be able to destroy every tank in one go, but they will weaken them. I'm considering replacing this unit because I think that by now we have too much anti-tank capability. It's too many units that can do the same job. The Aardvark over here might be interesting, or a stealth fighter, something like that. So for now I'm going to throw this thing out. Electric Voodoo is a nice seed unit because it carries a high amount of ECM for only 90 points. It has 2 Shrike missiles. They have a decent speed. Time over target is 65 seconds, not the best, but it's enough. So we're going to keep this seed plane in here, especially because he has so many of these aircraft in here and a couple of helicopters. We're going to need to clear the airspace. Air superiority fighter wise, he went with the F-15A Eagle A. I'm not sure why he picked this one over the C. I know that you get 1 card of C units versus 2 Eagle A's. Let's see if you still get 2 of these. Yeah, you do still get 2 of these. Let's see, comparing that to the Eagles. How many units do you get of the Eagle? You get 2 at trained. So for only 30 points more, you can get a unit that's pretty much superior in every single way. The F-16C Block 52 has better turn radius, exceptional air detection, 10% more ECM, AIM-9Ms versus AIM-9Ls, which makes them more deadly because they have better accuracy and a little bit more range, and 4 Fire and Forget MRAMs versus 4 semi-active Sparrows. So no F-15A Eagle here, but a Block 52. And then he has Intruders. These bombers are not bad for 75 points. You can drop a lot of these bombs onto a single target. They are carpet bombers, so don't expect all of these bombs to hit exactly at the same location. It's more like a carpet that they deploy, hence the name. So now let's see what we can do with that last point. And I'm hesitant between the F-15D or the Nighthawk. The Nighthawk is a sniper. This thing is used to pick off very heavy targets or very high point targets. The Eagle can do the same thing, but for 10 points more you get an ECM value of 40%. You get poor stealth versus exceptional, but the moment this thing drops its bombs, that exceptional stealth is going to plummet to none. And you get a couple of AIM-9Ms, which means that this thing can support the Block 52s if it needs to. So let's go with the Block 15, or sorry, with the 15D Eagle. Then Navy-wise, he went with a mixed setup slightly. I think that since it's a motorized deck, we're going to have our hands full managing all that infantry and all those airplanes. So I don't want to have too many airplanes in the, or too many units that I need to micro in this section. I think that the planes he went with are not bad, but I want to keep everything at the same speed. I went over this in well, pretty much all the videos I've done so far, I think. I like having my anti-ship aircraft at the same speed. And that means that I'm going to take the Super Hornets, the F-111G, which also travels at 1000, and the CF-18 ASUW. So now we got our 6 anti-ship planes. We can use some Tomcats, but I'm going to go with one of those because that is going to make its chance to hit quite an improvement, really. Let's see, you get a 30% accuracy, so this jumps to 52%, which is nice if you can get this guy to fire. And then STRB-90H. They're nice units, but they tend to run out of those Hellfires quickly. But if you use them the right way, they can usually do more damage for with those 8 Hellfires, then they're 70-point value. So let's keep these in for now. Just keep in mind they cannot be resupplied once they fired these Hellfires. And that leaves you just with a ship that has grenade launchers. So, that is NoMeansYes NORAD Motorized deck. I'll be checking out this deck, see how it performs in a 5-3-5 to larger maps. And let's see how well this deck performs. If you want to use it, deck code's in the description down below. If you want to send me your deck, I've put down a link in the description below as well, where you can send me your deck, but keep in mind I get a lot of decks per day. So I may not be able to feature your deck. I get a lot of them. Some of them I've already done a short while ago, so I'll skip over those. It's not a guarantee if you send in your deck that you're going to get it featured on the channel, so keep that in mind. And with that, it's the end of the video. So if you liked watching this this deck review, please hit the like button down below. And if you want to see more Wargame, you can always subscribe to my channel, because I try to have at least one Wargame video up every day. So with that, I hope to see you in the next video.